Thank you. I yield back.
It's a pretty good source of information.
Sure is. The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Durham, for being here today and for your patience with us. I want to talk about that space between law and policy, I guess, if you will. And I want to go back to, I think I got your words written down during your opening statement where you said there were troubling violations of law and policy. Do I have that right?
Yes, sir.
And so the assertion has been that perhaps there should have been more indictments, more people brought before the court for their actions. But it appears to me that you tried that and perhaps encountered, I have not looked at the two trials that turned out not to reach convictions, but was it a situation where there was something wrong but it didn't rise to the level of a crime? Is that what was going on in that space?
You conduct these investigations. We conducted this investigation, done other public corruption investigations, organized crime investigations, and when there's sufficient evidence that you believe that the evidence is sufficient to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, that case should be brought. There may be evidence that you have, but you're not confident that it would be sufficient to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt and sustain that case on appeal, and you don't bring the action. And here there was conduct, some of which was misconduct. There's conduct that was probably criminal, but you couldn't prove it. And that's true here. It appears in other instances as well.
Right, and I think the phrase political bias or confirmation bias has been used a number of times. Is that a crime?
Confirmation bias is not a crime. It's part of our human condition, I suppose.
Yes, and so you may well have found, and it sounds like you did, troubling violations of law and policy, which perhaps would not lead to, and did not, of course, convictions, but it doesn't make it any less wrong when we have our law enforcement agencies engaging in this kind of conduct. And I think that's why you call it troubling. Do I have that right?
You have that right.
And the question, I suppose, is what can we do about this situation looking forward? If it's not a crime, but we know it's wrong, what should we be doing? And I think you made some suggestions. Can you recite those for us? And you spent 4 years in this space, and there's obviously things going wrong that we can't convict people for, or at least it doesn't rise to the level that will warrant that approach. What should we be doing?
Yeah, I mean, the real difficulty, in my view, is trying to figure out how to hold people accountable for their conduct. And it's not a simple problem to solve. In the context of the FISA situation, you know, for example, or maybe it would be the case in any instance in which there's what's referred to in the Bureau as a sensitive investigative matter, a SIM, that there are additional rules that apply there. You know, maybe it's come time where if an agent is going to sign a FISA application in a sensitive investigative matter, that they not only understand that they're signing under the penalties of perjury, but if the Bureau determines that they intentionally misstated anything, that their employment will be terminated. I mean, there's real teeth in when somebody signs an affidavit, swears to something before a judicial officer, there are consequences if that is untrue. There are criminal penalties, but there sure as heck ought to be other penalties as well. I mean, there are things like that. In these sensitive cases, I mean, this is not a normal case. This is a presidential election and it affected the nation. Maybe they ought to instill practice, for example, of red teaming, which we tried to do to an extent in our investigation, which is you have a group of people who take the opposite side to make the arguments, to try to point out either where the weaknesses are or where additional evidence needs to be developed. It may be that the Bureau would benefit, as I said in the report, from having something of an ombudsman who would look at FISA applications or look at the investigative effort being undertaken in these sensitive investigative matters, who looks at how the investigation is progressing and whether or not, in that person's estimation, the investigation is being done independently and in a disciplined way. There are those kinds of things, but ultimately, I don't know how you hold people responsible, absent their integrity and that kind of overview or review of what the investigation is doing.
Thank you, Mr. Durham. I yield back.